Welcome to my channel. Here are the scariest stories from Reddit, and today we will be reading from our list. Story 1. A young woman at a bus stop. So, I worked as a security guard at a transit center. This is where all the buses in the city came into a central hub, before they were redeployed for their routes throughout the city. After a double shift and a few missed meals, I was starving and headed straight to the food court to get some dinner. On my way, I had to pass through the bus storage garage. This is a big open space where hundreds of buses were stored until they were needed. There were aisles between the rows of buses. Usually it was bright in here because most of the buses had their engines running to keep their air conditioning on during the hot summers. But tonight it was night shift, so all the lights were off except for the emergency exit signs. To make things worse, a storm had rolled in that evening and the doors were shut. I was thinking to myself how creepy this whole situation was. Just then I heard a loud bang, like a car door slamming. I looked around trying to find the noise, and I saw a girl walking toward me from the back of the garage. She was really attractive and didn't seem to care that she was walking right into the path of a closing emergency door. I tried to call out to her, to warn her, but it was too late. The door closed and hit her. I ran over and opened the door, and she ran out of the building before I could say a word to her. I remember thinking that I should probably get her name and number, but I was in shock and couldn't get my thoughts together. I was sitting there contemplating whether I should chase after her or not when suddenly the floor beneath me started rumbling. All the buses were starting up and backing out of their stalls. For the next hour, I watched as hundreds of buses moved through the narrow aisles. They had to reverse out of the garage because the front entrance was blocked off due to the storm. At this point, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, great, now I got I'll walk out to the front doors and cross the street in the parking lot to get to my car. I don't want to do that with all these buses driving everywhere and blocking traffic. I thought maybe I'd wait a few minutes and let things settle down before I went out. That's when I saw her. She was standing outside the window watching me. I waved and she smiled and mouthed thank you. I'm pretty sure she was the last bus out of there that night because I never saw her again. Story 2. The Caretaker. I used to work as a caretaker for an estate in the Scottish Highlands. The work involved me looking after the grounds, the gardens, and the lodge itself. I mostly kept myself to myself and didn't interact much with the owners. That all changed one morning when the owners asked if I could take their daughter out for the day. She was 17 at the time and wanted to go hiking, apparently somewhere she wouldn't be seen. I agreed, and I brought her to a clearing in the hills behind the house. We spent the day hiking and drinking, in relative silence. I didn't think she spoke much English, but every once in a while she would switch to English when she thought I wasn't listening. That was when I realized she wasn't saying normal things. She was saying things like, "I hope he burns in hell," laughing hysterically and throwing her head back. At the end of the day, as I drove her back to the lodge, she turned around in her seat and said, "Did you enjoy spending the day with me?" I lied and said that I did. I dropped her off at the front door and went about my business. Over the next few days, I overheard phone calls from the owner to a private investigator and another caretaker who quit unexpectedly a week prior. One night I was woken up to gunshots. The next day I was called into the office by the owner. He asked me why I had shot his daughter. I explained that I hadn't, that I barely knew her. He didn't believe me and fired me on the spot. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, this guy's an idiot. Why would you shoot your own daughter? But it turns out that the daughter was the result of an affair between the owner's wife and a former employee. The affair resulted in the birth of 2 children, both of which were taken away from their mother shortly after birth. The owner never allowed the ex-employee to come near his family out of fear that he would try to take the children. But the ex-employee returned for revenge, murdering the daughter in cold blood. The owner had hired a PI to investigate the previous caretaker and discovered that he was friends with the ex-employee. He assumed that I was an accomplice and decided to fire me. I left the next day and I haven't been back since. Story 3. Stairs. I have an uncle that used to work as a forest ranger in Michigan. He's gone through nights of tigers loose in a campsite without a working flashlight, drunk guys drowning in the rapids, and kids who passed away from hypothermia, their bodies found cradled peacefully at the bases of tall pine trees. A lot of strange and creepiness. Yes, but he never seemed disturbed when telling these stories. He saw it as just part of the job. He took me and my middle brother on a walk through my grandparents' woods one evening, while the adults made dinner. The other 2 boys were completely occupied with a video game, and there had only been 2 players in the game. So our uncle decided that he would give us other 2 some special attention, particularly to me. As being the only girl, I would get excluded from a lot. We walked for maybe 15 minutes before my uncle stopped dead at the swamp area in the woods, a place we often went to hunt for mushrooms in the summer. But right in the middle of this soggy part of the forest, we saw something extremely odd and even more out of place. Particularly, we hadn't seen it there before. You're not going to believe me when I say this, but there was a staircase in the middle of the swamp. It was as if someone had built a house there and everything, but the stairs had been swallowed up by the swamp. At the top of the stairs was a very small landing where a welcome mat or carpet sat, completely clean and untouched from what we could tell. I felt my face twist with confusion and bewilderment, and I looked up at my uncle, but the look on his face struck me like a cold ice pick. My uncle was terrified, shaking like it was the middle of winter. His eyes darted around the tree line like he was looking for something. Then he grabbed our hands and began to walk twice as fast. I've always been very short and unable to keep up, so I found myself being carried all the way back to the house. When we arrived, we stopped only when we were in direct sight of the house. And he told us not to say anything about it to anyone, especially the boys, and to not go out of sight of the house without him with us. We were very confused, but also extremely scared, as it just sounded insane to us. So, it was easy for us to keep our mouths shut. Recently, I went back home to visit, and I convinced my brother to come with me to see the staircase, though it took a lot to convince him to come along. At first, he refused to go without a weapon and our 200-pound mastiff. When we got there, back to the same spot from before, there was nothing, just a clearing, no bits of metal, no carpet, just an empty clearing and a nice big patch of mushrooms. Those mushrooms might have been in our dinner if our mastiff had growled the moment we stepped towards them. Maybe it was just a deer, but we left quickly, and we've never been back since or told anyone what we saw. Back in 2015, a user named Clockblocker submitted a story titled The Thing in the Ad. Now, when I read this story, I assumed it was a horror fan fiction written in the style of a true story. But according to the comments, this account has been verified by the Mords, and the story originally appeared on a forum called Fear. So, for the sake of the story, you can call me Cal. I worked as a police officer for the Atlantic City PD of New Jersey for 18 years. When I retired, I pulled some strings from my many years of service on the force, from cooperating with New York police officials to get a job with the Adirondack Park Rangers. I'd always loved the great outdoors, something I missed while working in Casino Central at Atlantic City. And what could be more outside the loop than 6.1 million acres of woods, rivers, lakes, and mountains? I was looking forward to it, a quiet bachelor's retirement, preserving the forest and looking after the nature I loved. But as it would turn out, nature also holds a lot of terrible secrets. I arrived at the Adirondack Park in 1995, a year after my retirement, to my designated park ranger cabin. We were required to live and work on the reserve. I was driven up from Atlantic City by the guy I was replacing, a fellow we can call Joe. Joe had worked here for over 30 years, and in spite of his graying hair, he was still sprying and full of life. After a long drive, we pulled into the clearing around the cabin. Joe showed me the well from which we drew water, where the power lines were, and around the small two-man cabin. As we were sitting on the front stoop, laughing, sharing fishing stories, and chewing on cigars, Joe suddenly got very quiet. He trained his ice blue eyes on me and asked, do you believe in God, Cal? My family is Italian and Irish. We're about as Catholic as you could get. My answer was an instant yes. Joe grimaced, grinding the stogie on the wooden railing of the porch. I don't know about God myself, Joe said, staring at the old growth rows of oak that ringed the clearing. The devil I'm more sure of, because I've seen him. He lives in those woods. I thought Joe was being overly dramatic and I chuckled, but he gave me a look, a cold, dark, and foreboding look, and my laughter extinguished. You'll see what I mean soon enough, he said, disposing of his cigar in the garbage inside the cabin. As he came back out with his fedora, he paused and looked at me. I love these woods, but there are dark things out there you couldn't even begin to imagine. For the first month after Joe left, I could almost convince myself his terrifying words were nothing more than park ranger hazing. He was initiating me to the camp by scaring me. Yeah, that was it. I quickly fell into the rhythm of ranger life, patrolling the woods and clearing paths, participating in biomass surveys with people from Albany. It wasn't all sunshine. The poachers were rife, and the anti-government malicious training illegally in the park aren't friendly at the best of times. But after 18 years on the beat, those punks didn't scare me. What did scare me, to the point of quitting this job, happened late one night. Part of my old life on the beat was being a night owl, and being a park ranger was no exception. It was late one August, and almost 10 p.m., when the ranger station called in. They said a family had been separated from their little girl, and they needed all hands on deck to mount a search. I was instantly awake, putting down my dog-eared W.E.B. Griffin book and hauling on my park ranger uniform and donning my cap, I met up with my boss, Captain O'Rourke, and he assigned me to follow a tributary of Grindstone Creek near where the family had last seen their daughter. I led a bunch of civilian volunteers down the creek, armed with flashlights and intermittent firearms. There had been black bear activity in the area, so packing heat made sense. As we fanned out along the creek, I gradually separated from the others, scanning the forest until my flashlight caught something pink, totally at odds with the summer ground cover. I yelled out that I had found something, but then my flashlight panned up, and I wished to this day that I had never done that. I had found the girl, but she was in pieces, scattered across the clearing. What my flashlight had caught was her arm, no longer attached, with the stub of a pink t-shirt still there. I gagged, and that was when I heard it. It was a strange, cooing, hooting sound. Something about the sound turned the blood in my veins to ice as I panned my light in the direction of it, and it felt like my soul died in my chest. Standing there easily 7 feet tall was this thing. That's the only way I can describe it. It was tall but heavily emaciated, about as wide as I could see its ribs protruding out of its rotting gray flesh. Its feet were hooved, but it had hands like a man, albeit with long, disgusting black talons in place of fingers. Its head, that was what still gives me nightmares. Instead of a normal head, it appeared more as a buck's skull with a massive rack of 8 or so points. Its mouth was full of dagger-like teeth, which curved up and outwards the closer to the front of the mouth they got. And in its jaws, I saw a piece of the child, dangling limply as it fixed me with a nightmarish gaze from demonic yellow eyes. I didn't move, nor did the thing. For a space of about 10 seconds, when it cocked its head to the side, it let out another coo-hoot and took a step towards me. I screamed, and as fast as I possibly could, made for my revolver, but in the blink of an eye, it was gone, disappearing in the brush. The remainder of the search party found me pretty quick, considering I had apparently and unknowingly fired my entire revolver cartridge into the now empty woods and I'd have been crying. When I explained what had happened, I lied, mostly to myself, saying that I saw a black bear, but that's definitely not what I remember. Whatever it wasn't natural, not of this world of the living. There and then, that day, I quit my job. I left the Adirondacks, and I have never looked back. I pray that what I saw was simply some sort of vision or hallucination, but it was very, very real to that little girl. What a story. Right, let me know your thoughts on the thing in the Adirondacks in the comments below. Is it possible that somewhere in the vast wilderness of America's 6th largest state, there exists a creature that preys on unsuspecting hikers? Or is there something else going on here? Perhaps the desperate mind of a man who recently lost his son around the same age as the victim in the story creates a monster born of grief. And maybe that's why the protagonist doesn't want to talk about the incident in any capacity in the present day. Something put him up there. I'll begin by saying my father runs a bar and grill in a small town in the northeastern US. Our town isn't very big, but most of our revenue comes from tourism. Since we aren't far from a state park, fairly often, we'll get forest rangers and police coming in, and as you can imagine, once they're drunk, they have some very interesting stories to tell. As it so happens, my sister got very close to one of these rangers, and they got married, and he is now my brother. Usually, the rangers and police will come in pretty somber and buy a drink when something horrible happens, like a messy car accident or a missing child case. One day when I was working the bar, my brother-in-law comes in really shaken up. He orders a whiskey and puts 100 down on the bar. Of course, I ask him if he's okay, and he gives me this look like he just saw someone pass away right in front of his eyes. Then he just asks for the whole bottle. I put a glass down in front of him, then pour his first cup of the whiskey, and I left the bottle for him to have it as pleasing. As the night goes on, a few other rangers come in, and they're all just like Arthur. I call over one of them. "Hey, what happened out there today?" I asked. "Missing kid." He pauses. "He found him." The man gestures to Arthur. "Oh God, that bad?" I ask. "Worse," he says, then goes to sit down with the others. I look down the bar to Arthur, who at this point has nearly cleaned out the second bottle. "Arthur, man, what's wrong?" I ask. How did he get up there?" Arthur mumbles, so low I could barely hear him. "What do you mean, put him up there?" I ask, to no avail, as he suddenly locks up. This really freaked me out because as a bartender, drunks often want to talk you up the whole night. And even Arthur has done this from time to time. Later on, I end my shift early, handing the bar over to a coworker, and I begin to take Arthur home. In the car, he begins to open up. At first, He talks so fast that between the slurs and the pace, I have a hard time keeping up with him. But to my memory, this is very close to what he said. I got the call. I got called and I went. The boy was gone and his mum had no idea where he was. Then I went out to find him because we couldn't leave him. But why was he there? How was he there? He couldn't be there, but he was. He was. But how? He was all bloodied and so high. Half of him was gone. I don't know where it is, but it's not there with him. At this point, he was crying, and I made the mistake. I wish I hadn't. Where was he, Arthur? Up there, he said, looking up as if the kid was on the roof of my car. In the tree, 50 feet up. I found him because the blood had fallen on me. Arthur locked up again. And this time I was actually glad he did. He kept staring at his hands, like there was something there. When we got to his home, I was trying to find the keys to get him inside, when he grabbed me very suddenly and made me yelp. He looked me in the eye, his face serious, and I thought for a second he had somehow completely sobered up. Something put him there, he said, staring into my eyes. What put him there? I asked. I don't know. I don't want to know, Arthur said. My sister opened the door, having heard us outside, and she helped me get him in and lay him down. She asked me what was wrong with him, and I told her that she didn't want to know, to just believe me that he had a very, very bad day. That night, I lay awake thinking about what Arthur had said. To this day, he doesn't talk about it, and that's fine by me. But sometimes, I wonder what could put that kid 50 feet up in a tree. But just like Arthur, there's a part of me that desperately doesn't want to know. Well, if you want to hear more unsettling tales of cryptids and other horrors lurking in the American wilderness, check out the podcast. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the channel through various platforms.